We are reading Gladys Aylward, The Adventure of a Lifetime by Janet and Geoff Benge. We're on chapter 5, titled The Knock on the Door. Gladys picked her way through the slimy puddles back to the Intourist Hotel. It had been an aimless day of wandering the streets with her interpreter close by. The revolving door of the Intourist Hotel clicked as she pushed on it, and then she heard it click again as the interpreter followed her through the door. Inside the lobby, Gladys glanced around. The interpreter was lighting yet another cigarette and pulling up his chair at the foot of the stairs. Short of crawling out of her second-story window, Gladys could think of no way to escape from him. With her shoulders slumped forward, she climbed the stairs to her room. As she did so, a young girl about 17 years of age brushed past her. As the girl passed her, Gladys thought she heard her whisper in perfect English, "Don't say anything and follow me." She turned to see whether she was imagining it, but the girl with long, straight black hair was looking the other way. Gladys wondered whether, in her desperation to escape, she was beginning to imagine things. Her heart beat fast as she turned and followed the girl down the corridor at the top of the stairs. As she rounded a corner in the corridor, Gladys was suddenly grabbed by the sleeve of her orange dress and pulled into a darkened doorway. "Who are you?" she asked as her eyes adjusted to the shadows. "That does not matter," whispered the girl. "You are in great danger." Gladys nodded. "Your passport?" the girl asked. "The official has it," replied Gladys. "You must get it back at all costs," said the girl in an urgent voice. "Look at it carefully. The communists are desperate for skilled workers. I have seen other foreigners taken to the interior and never heard of again." A chill ran down Gladys's spine. "You get your passport," the girl repeated before continuing. "You will hear a knock at your door at midnight. Go with the man quickly. Do not speak to him. Do not look closely at him. Just go fast." Gladys nodded. She felt as though she were a character in a bad spy novel. Yet it wasn't a story. It was really happening to her. The girl turned and walked away. With shaking hands, Gladys smoothed a piece of hair that had fallen from her bun. She walked back down the stairs to where the official was sitting in his chair with his hands clasped behind his head and his boots crossed on the table. He didn't bother to move them as Gladys spoke to him. "You have my passport," she said, looking down into his cold eyes. "I need it back now." She spoke in her firmest voice. "It is still being examined. I will bring it to your room," the official said, and then looking Gladys up and down, he added, "Tonight." Gladys stuffed her hands deep into the pockets of her coat to hide the fact they were shaking violently with fear. What if the two men arrived at her room at the same time? She didn't want to think about it. She turned and climbed the stairs again. For most of the evening, she sat shivering on the edge of the bed, with her fur coat tucked around her legs, trying to keep warm. Finally, she heard a loud knock on the door. When she opened the door, she saw the official standing in front of her, holding a British passport in his right hand. The official stuck his foot in the doorway so that Gladys couldn't shut the door, and then he waved the passport and leered at her. Gladys could see he had more on his mind than just delivering her passport. Quickly, before she even thought about what she was doing, she snatched the passport from the official's hand and threw it back over her head into the room. The surprised official took 2 steps into the room. He stood so close to Gladys that she could smell the cigarettes on his breath. "Why did you do that?" he asked in a mocking voice. "I told you I was coming to visit you tonight." He shut the door firmly behind himself. For a moment, Gladys was frozen to the floor with fear. Then she suddenly jumped backwards and screamed, "You can't touch me! You can't touch me! God will protect me!" Her desperation seemed to amuse the official, who laughed heartily. "You forget. You are a woman, alone in a strange country. I can do what I like." Gladys repeated herself, "You can't touch me. God will protect me." As she spoke, the official began to curse her in English. He raised his hand to punch her, but his hand stopped in midair. Instead, as if guided by some invisible force, he turned around, opened the door, and walked out. Gladys breathed a deep sigh of relief and with trembling hands quickly bolted the door. She stooped down and picked up her passport. She remembered what the girl said about examining it, and sure enough, there on the first page of the passport, her occupation had been altered. It no longer read missionary, but machinist. It seemed the Russian officials would stop at nothing to get workers for their factories. More than ever, Gladys knew she had to get away, and quickly. She parted the drapes a little and peered out into the darkness. Ice was already forming on the inside of the window. She was glad to be wearing every piece of clothing she owned, except for the pair of darned stockings. She would have liked to have worn them over her other pair of stockings, but they padded her feet so much she couldn't get her shoes on over them. She had stuffed the old stockings into her coat pocket. For no particular reason, she'd also taken the English £1 note out of the secret pocket in her corset and slipped it into her coat pocket along with the stockings. Midnight came and went, but there was no knock on the door. She began to worry. Had something gone wrong? Had the girl lied? Was it all an elaborate trap? Maybe it was a sick joke someone was playing on her. Almost 2 hours passed before the knock on the door finally came. It was so soft Gladys wasn't sure whether it was real or not. She tiptoed to the door and unbolted it. She knew she was taking a risk. It could just as easily be the official again, but she had no choice. It wasn't safe for her to stay any longer in Vladivostok. She would just have to trust that a pair of total strangers were willing to risk their lives to save hers. The door swung open, and there stood a tall man in an old overcoat with his hat pulled down over his face. He put his fingers to his lips and motioned for Gladys to follow him. Gladys pulled on her thick woolen gloves, grabbed her 2 bags, and crept out the door. The man with the overcoat led her along the hallway and then down the stairs. Gladys's heart began to race. The man was leading her right out the front entrance of the hotel, past the clerk and the official. She prayed a silent prayer and then listened. She heard snoring coming from the clerk's desk, and as she got to the bottom of the stairs, she saw that the official's chair was empty. Gladys gripped the suitcases hard until her fingers ached, and she kept walking. The revolving door squeaked as she went through it. The clerk's snoring faltered at the noise, but then it resumed. At last Gladys was out on the pitch-black street without the official following her. Other than the light from the hotel lobby, not a light was to be seen. After leaving the glow of the hotel lobby, Gladys had to squint to see the man in front of her. She and the man stayed close to the sides of buildings as they walked. Gladys stumbled through potholes, wondering where she was going. Slowly, as she began to adjust to the situation, she noticed the smell of the dock in Hull where she'd caught the boat to Holland 3 weeks before. On the skyline, Slowly, as she began to adjust to the situation, she noticed some clues. There was a salty smell in the air, like the smell on the dock in Hull where she'd caught the boat to Holland 3 weeks before. On the skyline in the distance, she could make out some tall, thin towers, far too thin to be buildings. Gladys was sure they were headed towards the docks and guessed that the towers were cranes. Was she about to be put on a ship to China instead of on a train? She didn't care, as long as whatever it was took her away from the danger she was in. Gladys stumbled on over railroad lines and into a large paved area. Packing cases were stacked everywhere, and from behind one packing case emerged the girl from the hotel with the long black hair. Gladys walked towards her. When she looked back, the man in the overcoat was fading into the shadows of the night. Gladys wanted to thank him, but she knew she dared not call out to him. Within seconds, he was gone. Gladys turned back to the girl. "You made it," the girl said with admiration. "Yes," replied Gladys. "Why are you helping me?" When we are able, we help those who need help," was the girl's reply. Then she went on, "But now I can do no more for you. You must take the next step alone. See that freighter over there?" She pointed towards the dark outline of a ship in the distance. Gladys nodded. "It is a Japanese ship," she went on. "It sails at dawn for Tsuruga, Japan, and you must be on it. No matter what, you must be on it." "But I don't have any money for the fare," interrupted Gladys. The girl looked her straight in the eye. "Beg the captain. Do whatever you have to do, but get on the ship. It is your only hope." Gladys nodded again. The captain of the ship is in that hut over there. You must make him take you with him. The girl pointed to a ramshackle wooden hut in the direction of the ship, just beyond the stacks of packing crates. A little frightened, Gladys knew what she had to do. She reached for the young girl's bare hands. "You've saved my life, and I have nothing to give you," she said. Then she had an idea. She stripped off her woolen gloves and handed them to the girl. Then she took the old pair of stockings from her coat pocket and handed them over as well. "They're not much, but they are all I have." The girl nodded and smiled, and then nudged Gladys toward the hut. "Good luck," she said as she turned and slipped away into the shadows. The single light bulb that lit the inside of the hut blinded Gladys's eyes for a moment as she walked in out of the darkness. As her eyes adjusted, she saw 4 Japanese men playing cards around a makeshift table. Gladys took a deep breath. "I need to talk to the captain of the freighter," she said. The man closest to her stood up and in good English said, "What can I do for you?" "I must get on your ship," said Gladys frantically. The captain looked at her fur overcoat with no sleeves, her crumpled orange dress, filthy shoes, and gloveless hands, and asked whether she had money to pay for the trip. "No, I have nothing, but you must let me on your ship. You must. I am a British citizen, and I must get away from here," begged Gladys, thrusting her passport at him. The captain flicked through it. "You have nothing of value at all?" he questioned. "No jewelry, no watch, no money?" Gladys shook her head. She had forgotten about the £1 note in her pocket. Anyways, it was such a small amount, it wouldn't have bought her passage on a ship. She held her breath and waited for what he would say next. Excuse me. "A British citizen in trouble," he said. "We cannot have that. But I cannot take you as a passenger if you can't pay." Gladys's heart sank. "But," continued the captain, a little smile on his lips, "a prisoner, I could take you as a prisoner, and then you would be under my protection. I would have to hand you over to the British authorities in Suruga. What? Would that do?" he asked kindly. Tears of relief welled up in Gladys's eyes. Yes, yes," she said enthusiastically. She enthusiastically replied, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I will gladly be your prisoner. Anything is better than staying here." The captain reached into the satchel he had with him and pulled out a sheet of paper. "Please sign the form, and then we'll go." Gladys couldn't read a word of what she signed. It was all written in Japanese, but somehow she trusted the captain. As soon as the paper was signed, the 4 men rose from the table and headed into the darkness. Gladys gratefully followed them. They reached the pier where the freighter was moored, and the sailors jumped aboard. There was only a 1.5 foot gap between the ship and the pier. Instead of jumping straight aboard, as the sailors had, Gladys put her bags down for a moment to take a deep breath before she jumped. It was a bad decision. Suddenly, Gladys heard the sound of jackboots running on cobblestones. She grabbed her bags, but it was too late. 6 large Russian soldiers surrounded her and towered over her. She looked to the ship for help. The sailors watched, but they did not move. She was still on Russian soil, and she supposed the sailors dared not interfere with the soldiers. Gladys had to think fast. Suddenly, she remembered the £1 note in her coat pocket. She spun around and threw her bags onto the ship. Quickly, she pulled the £1 note from her coat pocket, waved it in the air, and then let it go. As it fluttered to the ground, 6 pairs of eyes focused on it, and 6 pairs of hands grasped for it. While the soldiers' attention was momentarily diverted, Gladys jumped aboard the ship and began running up the stairway toward the captain on the bridge. The soldiers yelled at her, but it was too late. The captain had given the order to cast off, and the freighter began to drift away from the dock before the soldiers could do anything. Gladys was safe. She was headed for Japan and away from Russia. Another passenger, a German woman, was on board with Gladys. The 2 women swapped stories of their perilous journeys through Russia. The German woman's hands were bandaged, and she unwrapped them to show Gladys. The skin had been peeled back on several of her fingers, and Gladys could see muscles and even parts of bone underneath. She couldn't imagine how the woman could have injured herself in such a way. Then she heard the story of what had happened. The German woman had been robbed by a mob of Russian men. Everything, including her luggage, coat, money, gloves, and scarf, had been stolen. The robbers also damaged the rings the woman had been wearing. When she hesitated, they ripped them off, tearing the skin and flesh from her hands. After hearing the woman's story, Gladys was even more grateful to know that every turn of the ship's propeller was taking her farther away from the communist nightmare she had just traveled through. Things went much better for Gladys when she reached Suruga, a small port on Japan's west coast. The captain of the ship personally handed his prisoner over to an official from the British consulate who brought Gladys a huge meal and paid for her train ticket to Kobe, though not before telling her he thought she was crazy. In Kobe, Gladys found a missionary compound and was welcomed inside. She had a wonderful hot bath and slept in a comfortable bed for the first time since leaving London. While she slept, one of the missionaries took the unused part of her train ticket from Chita to Harbin and traded it for a boat trip to Tientsin. And so on Saturday, November 5th, 1930, 21 days after leaving London for China, Gladys began the final leg of her journey on a steamship. As the ship weaved its way through the southern islands of Japan and then steamed out across the Yellow Sea, Gladys thanked God that the journey was nearly over. In Tientsin, Mrs. Lawson would be waiting for her. Soon, she would finally be able to begin her missionary work in China. Little did Gladys know that Mrs. Lawson had not seriously expected a housemaid from London to actually make it all the way to China, and Mrs. Lawson was nowhere near Tientsin. If Gladys wanted to work with Mrs. Lawson, she was going to have to find her first. And that's it.